Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations, episode number 52. I'm your host, Joe Hannon. It is another beautiful winter day here in New Jersey. Got some snow on the ground. Feeling seasonally appropriate, despite the fact that we are living through a climate catastrophe. Trying to adjust the camera here. Very lo-fi, unprofessional setup for this podcast, despite outward appearances. For those of you who watch the video version of this podcast, I record this with my iPhone. It's like an iPhone Pro 11, I believe, using continuity camera in QuickTime. That's how low budget our operation here is. But the iPhone camera is actually really good. So if you're looking to start a podcast, you don't even need a fancy mic like this. You can use your iPhone and your earbuds and bam, you got a podcast. But that's besides the point. Week removed from the Miami Open. It's been a great week on the mats. You know, I always really enjoy the week after a competition because the need to just work my A game and kill everybody dissipates, and I could go back to more of like an experimental, relaxed frame of mind and just really like get back in touch with all the things I love about the game and all the things that brought me there in the first place. So it's been a nice reset, let's call it. It's been a very nice reset. And despite intentions, I've actually been training quite hard. Part of that is just like the class structure we've been playing with. Like last night was more of a judo focused class with a lot of stand up, and stuff is exhausting. Would much rather just pull guard, but hey, can't always do that all the time, right? So this week's episode is inspired by, I've been reading a lot of Alan Watts lately, and I have been thinking a lot about this particular thing he said in a recorded talk. If you haven't listened to it, there's a fantastic podcast called Being in the Way, I believe it's called. Either way, if you just search for Alan Watts on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll probably find it. And they're just all of Watts's recorded lectures kind of curated around different topics. And I believe it's actually his son who's put these materials together, and they're fantastic. And I was listening to this one where he was talking about self-knowledge and being aware of your own nature. And he said something that really struck me. And it's something that I felt via jiu-jitsu for a long time. And it's something that I was thinking about deeply during the pandemic, but I failed to articulate in a way that made sense to people. And I'm hoping that I can do a better job of it now, because I think Watts puts this into a beautifully clear perspective. He says, you have to have just a touch of rascality to be human. And I find it difficult to get along with people who don't know that they have it. People who come off as if they're all sincere, all good, and all pure bore me to death. And they scare me as they are unconscious of themselves, and therefore they suddenly do terrible things without warning, either to themselves or to others. I like this notion of rascality because there's a playfulness to it. And if you know anything about Watts, he made no buts about being a rascal. It was a term he used frequently to describe himself. Even the way in his later years he like chose to present himself with his beard and his hair styled in a particular fashion. He was doing it in such a way to emulate these mythic like Chinese rascals that he was so fond of. They were like anti-heroes, you know? They were these extremely witty people who would constantly poke at you. And the poking was good-natured, but they were rascals. They were trying to get under you to sort of make you realize something. And I think Watts certainly made many people realize things that he wouldn't otherwise had he not been such a rascal. So I like this notion of rascality when you take it and you then transpose it over to in jiu-jitsu, because I find that the more I study this art, the more it kind of like puts me in touch with my inner rascal. And I think that it's because many of us lack an embodied practice. This is something I was talking to with Liz Bass, who does the artwork for many of these episodes. Recently, we had an exchange on WhatsApp about this. Many of us lack an embodied practice. And I think that embodied physical practice, especially combative arts like jiu-jitsu, they're like human pressure cookers. And they have a way of rendering away anything artificial. You put somebody under that kind of pressure for long enough, and what you're left with, what sort of is the bones of who they are. And you really get a sense for who they are and how they behave when they're rendered in such a way. And I'm really thinking about, when I say rendered and pressure cooker, I'm literally thinking about, like, if I want to understand who somebody is as a person, if I really want to understand where their strengths and weaknesses lie, I want to see how they react to being under a heavy side control that they can't escape, or how they react to intense mount pressure, or how they react to an extremely aggressive passer. You know, the pressure cooker of jiu-jitsu has a way of revealing things. And I find that when I examine my own evolution through jiu-jitsu, the pressure cooker of jiu-jitsu has revealed my inner rascality. And ultimately, I think this is a positive thing, not just for me, but for everyone. Because if you think about the white belt who comes into the jiu-jitsu school, they may be a black belt in whatever professional domains they have. They may be a black belt in whatever interpersonal domains they have. Like, maybe they're a parent and they're an excellent parent. Maybe they're an accountant and they're an excellent accountant. They know accounting inside and out better than anybody. But they don't know violence. They don't know darkness. They don't know their shadow. They don't know what they're capable of when they're pushed to a point, either cognitively or somatically, where they need to choose violence, or where their body is experiencing a life or death struggle. They've never been there. They don't know what it's like. And they get their first taste of it in jiu-jitsu. And maybe they get their first taste of their shadow in jiu-jitsu. I think many of us, and I'm talking about like the Jungian shadow here, the things about ourselves that remain in the dark aspects of our personality, the things that we struggle to see on our own. Ultimately, we need someone or something else to reveal them to us. And you take somebody who's never been exposed to a heavy side control, a heavy mount, or violence in general, and their shadow comes out because their body is reacting as if they're dying and they need to do something and they need to survive. The darker aspects of your humanity show up. You know, you see this in strange ways. Like, for example, someone was telling me a story the other day of, in the kids class, they were working on an open guard passing drill, and this girl had incredible open guard, and this guy couldn't get around her. We're talking about like 8-year-olds here. And he's getting frustrated and he starts throwing kicks at her, you know, and that's this boy's shadow manifesting itself. That's his darker instincts coming to the surface. And, you know, obviously we're dealing with children. Children lack self-control compared to adults, but I've seen similar things happen in adult jiu-jitsu classes. I had, for example, this guy was his very first class. He was partnered up with me, and we were doing the classic self-defense scenario where you have somebody inside your closed guard and they're trying to hit you, and you use your knees you pull your knees to your chest to close the distance and eliminate their ability to hit you. And I'm doing this to this guy, and the farther the drill progresses, the more real his strikes are becoming, to the point where I had to stop and said, hey, you know, just so you know, like, we don't actually throw strikes in jiu-jitsu. For the sake of this drill, you know, you're just kind of like trying to tap me. Right now it feels like you're actually trying to deck me, and I don't appreciate that. And I could clearly see that this was an element of this person's shadow coming to the surface that perhaps they had never experienced before. And I don't even think they were conscious of what they were doing. I don't think they were even conscious of how hard they were trying to hit me. But I think the sense of being a rascal that Watts is talking about here is the self-knowledge that comes from deliberate self-examination. But I also think it can come from jiu-jitsu. There's this guy who contacted me recently about doing some work together, and he used this beautiful analogy. He said that jiu-jitsu is sort of the hub of his wheel of life. And I think that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why I relate to that so strongly is that I've always felt that jujitsu, if we're going to use the hub analogy, jujitsu is the hub for an examined life. You know, if the examined life is the wheel, we can examine our life from a number of different dimensions. And I think jujitsu gives us something to do that with, largely because it is embodied. You can sit there and you can journal all you want. You can sit there and meditate all you want. And I think all of these things are essential. Like it's why they're part of the ecology of practices that I use myself and that I recommend for people. But without that embodied physical practice, the shadow really never has a chance to emerge. And the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu is, you know, it's a controlled experiment. Like, shadow emerges, you have your training partners who can observe and give you feedback. You have your own internal feedback loops where you can reflect on what you did. You have an instructor, hopefully, who has control over the whole experiment and can see when things are getting out of hand. But you can flirt. Basically, what I'm saying is you can flirt with that line. You can walk that line in as controlled a manner as possible. And eventually, I don't know if you learn to control it so much as you learn where that line is. And you learn the ability to like embrace that rascal nature. And I think the rascal is the person who can play with that line, who can take an air of playfulness to it and disarm it slightly. And, you know, I, like Watts, I'm very reluctant around people who don't do this. And there are even people like on the mats who I've met who are grapplers who just they have no idea of their own darkness because for whatever reasons, religious or just a lack of self-examination, like they have never looked into themselves and realized that there are darker aspects of their personality. And like Watts, not only do I find them not interesting by and large, but they do frighten me. And they frighten me because these are the kind of people who are so sanctimonious that they can convince themselves of anything. They can convince themselves that they're just when they're unjust. These are the people who can launch wars for sort of moralistic reasons, when in actuality it's about something simple like resources or money or territory. You know, I'm much more at ease in a way when I'm dealing with somebody who's a bad actor and they make no bones about it. Now, I'm not saying that we should all be bad actors, but I think we should be aware of our inner bad actor. I think that, as Watts says, brings a level of consciousness to yourself. You understand then that you are capable of doing terrible things. You understand that these terrible things have real consequences for yourself and others. And when you're aware of that, and at the same time, when you can bring this rascal attitude toward it, this air of almost like playfulness, it de-weaponizes that a little bit. And I think that process is much more impactful and important than just pretending it doesn't exist. And this, you know, came up a lot during the pandemic for me because I saw a lot of people behaving in strange ways that they wouldn't otherwise. And I think a lot of that was because the normal structures of their life had been removed. And I think a lot of us sort of avoid or blunt that shadow, that confrontation with our shadow, just by comfort of those structures or by habit with those structures. And the pandemic took them all away. You know, you can't go to the store anymore. You start losing your mind. You can't get items instantly on Netflix or on Amazon, and you start losing your mind. What I found was my sort of losing my mind came directly from the fact that like I didn't have access to my movement practice. I didn't have jiu-jitsu to process these things, to process like the darker aspects of my personality, of myself. And they were coming out in strange, mostly political ways, you know? This was a point I tried to make unsuccessfully in a Clubhouse room. Remember Clubhouse? Yeah, Clubhouse is one of those things that died with the pandemic, I think. There are probably still some people out there, but I'm not there anymore. I much prefer this format. Yeah, I tried to make this point in a clubhouse room, and it kind of fell on deaf ears. And it fell on deaf ears because I think I was dealing with people who lacked an embodied practice. This was like an extremely cerebral, intellectual room that I was in, and everybody was a lot smarter than me. And I was struggling to make this point. And only in retrospect did I realize that they didn't get it because they haven't experienced it. They don't have an embodied practice. Therefore, they can't understand how something like jiu-jitsu brings you literally and metaphorically to grips with not only the darker aspects of yourself, hopefully, but the darker aspects of other people too. It makes you more skilled at dealing with them. And beyond that, it provides, as this extremely insightful person said to me, it provides you that hub for this wheel of an examined life. And I think that it's important for us to keep that in perspective, that, yeah, like jiu-jitsu can just be what it is. It can just be a martial art. It can just be this thing that we do either for self-defense reasons or for fitness or for whatever reason. Maybe you just want to, you're just bored and you need something to do, and this is more constructive than playing video games. But it also does provide this opportunity for us to examine ourselves in totality, not just the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, but who we actually are, who others actually see when they come to grips with us. What do they see that we cannot see? And I think eventually you do this enough and you can embrace this inner rascal that Watts is talking about. Then the rascal has the ability to see oneself and others for who and what they are. And that, I think, is far more significant than any technical mastery of this martial art. So that's really all I have for you this week. Next week, got a cool episode coming up. It's going to be a collaboration with the dudes over at 1-800-BJJ-HELP crossover episode. I believe they're going to publish that close to when I'm going to publish it. I'm hoping we can get another Act 2 together with them and go deep on bow hunting, because both of them are bow hunters, which I think is very cool. Here I was thinking I was the only BJJ podcaster who was also a bow hunter, but apparently I'm in good company. So looking forward to that, should it happen. The other big ask I have for you all is I've been thinking about doing some sort of event, whether in person or even just digital. Maybe it's better to start digital and scale up from there. But obviously I don't want to do that if there's no appetite for it. So if you're listening to this and that's something that would interest you, either in person or digital, I want to get an idea for numbers and sort of what specifically you might be interested in. Just email me if you don't mind. bjjmeditations@gmail.com. Tell me, in person or digital, tell me what you'd like to see structure, format wise. And that will help shape my decision-making in terms of whether that's something you find valuable or not. So please, please, please do that. And you can write me for any reason. I have beautiful correspondence going with a few of you. I very much enjoy hearing how you're relating to these things, but more important, I very much enjoy hearing your stories and how you came to this martial art and what you're getting out of it. It's very useful to know. And it really helps me improve in my ability to use this martial art as a hub on this wheel of an examined life. So thank you for that. Please keep them coming. BJJMeditations.com. That's where you can book coaching sessions with me. It's the best way to support me. You can also donate to offset production costs of the podcast via Venmo. There's a link there. Read the essays that underpin some of these episodes, all that good stuff. Also, check out the highest levels on BJJ Mental Models Premium. It's where Emily Kwok and I go deep on the tactics that we use in the peak performance consulting business with Josh Wadeskin. You can steal some of that fire and put it in play for yourself. If you'd like to sponsor BJJ Meditations, especially if you happen to work for Show Your Roll or Kekawa Collective, two of my favorite brands. You can also email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. Finally, support the podcast by liking, subscribing, reviewing, and sharing wherever you're listening to, and follow on Instagram, we're BJJ_meditations. Last but not least, come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the brainchild of Emily Kwok. Love to have you. We welcome any and all affiliates and academies for drop-ins. Don't care what gi you're wearing as long as it's clean. Keep your fingernails short. Keep yourself not smelly. Those sorts of things. For brand new grapplers, if you know anyone who's looking to start their journey in the central New Jersey area, we're running the 47 challenge. That's $70. You get 4 classes and a free gi. Complete those 4 classes, and we take $70 off your first month's membership. We also offer free trial memberships, 2 free trials for any and all, 0 obligation. Take the trial, join us or not. Doesn't matter. Try before you buy. Any school out there that doesn't let you try before you buy should be suspect. Other than that, thank you very much for listening. I hope you all have an amazing week on the mats, and we will talk soon.